They're like taco flavored tubes, and they're delicious. What we have here are AEM high output coil packs. They are 130 MJ a piece, which is a lot of power out of a coil pack. Your typical like single blaster coil, like you would see on a Chevrolet, is about 60,000, and so I have 4 of them at 130. Do the math on that spark energy. I can open the spark plug gap up. Actually, these plugs right here are gapped at about 55 thousandths, which is, you know, not too high for the motor if it was stock, but running 100 horsepower worth of nitrous through it and still being able to run that kind of gap is impressive. So this is a pretty significant chunk of weight, but I feel like it's worth it when I can really step up the spark energy. So spark should never be an issue of ours. Lots of other things will be issues, but spark's not one of them. What I'm doing right now is just making room for turbo fun. I might actually move this whole coil pack harness, except I grounded it to both sides. Well, either way, it's going underneath the fuel lines now. It was above them before, so now it's going to be below them. Luckily, I numbered them. It's always important to number things so that if you put it together and bundle it up, you can figure out what it was that you had when you try to go put it back together later. Because nothing's worse than not knowing what plugs into what and then having issues getting it sorted out. One of the issues here that I'm having is this fuel filter originally sat down here, but since I moved the manifold back around, I have to move the fuel filter. I think if I just kind of loosen these two fittings, I can flip it up this way and then it'll fit just fine. I'll try to do that. Most people use AN wrenches for this. I am not most people, and I don't really care if I scuff my AN fittings. Again, on a customer project or something, I usually use AN wrenches, but personal stuff doesn't really matter. All right, so as you can see, that made quite a bit more room. Let's tighten these back down. It's always important with fuel lines to either leave them fully loose or fully tight. You don't ever want to have something snug but not tightened. The reason for that is it may not necessarily leak right away, but as soon as you do a run, if you didn't tighten it, it's going to start spewing fuel everywhere. The reason why I say it's important to either leave them super loose or all the way tight is if it's super loose, when you first prime the fuel pump, it becomes pretty obvious you have a fuel leak when it starts shooting fuel everywhere. But if it's not super obvious and it takes a little bit of vibration, like this one here that I left loose the other day, if I had snugged that down finger tight, it may have not leaked right away, and then I may have been driving the car, suddenly spring a leak and burn this thing to the ground. So that's not what we want. What we want is for everything to either be apparent right away or just be proper. So what we're doing now is attaching the AN feed line to the turbo. First we got to take off this dash 4 fitting that was on there from the previous setup. We want to run a dash 3 in this case just because of smaller, more compact clearances. The pipe's going to go right up over the top of the turbo, so I don't want a big dash 4 sticking out of the turbo. So I have a dash 3 Garrett style restrictor to 1/8 NPT fitting, and I have a dash 3 swivel, so we're going to come out at 90 degrees and it's going to be a lot cleaner than the old setup. Now unfortunately I'm not the best at getting things into the film, but what I'm doing here is applying PTFE tape to this NPT fitting. It's a pipe thread, so you do need some kind of sealant. They don't typically seal on their own just from compression. This tape is kind of debated, but as long as you keep it off the edge of the threads, it doesn't seem to cause big issues down the road. It works pretty well, it seals pretty well, and it doesn't tend to deteriorate with the heat, but you do want to check and know that if you're going to have a leak, it's going to be on an NPT fitting. So now we're bringing the fitting onto the turbo, and this is a 032 fitting, which is pretty small for a precision turbo, but they seem to like it better on the Subarus that run pretty high oil pressure. Having a little bit of troubles getting it in there just because it's a slightly shallower taper than the one that came out, but it does go in. So we're going to put that in there, we're going to tighten it down, and then we're going to attach the oil feed line. So we're just tightening down this 8th NPT to dash 3 fitting. You don't want to go super tight, so I don't use a long-handled wrench. If you over tighten them, you will break the threads off of the turbo, and it's a pain in the butt to get it out. If you under tighten it, it leaks. So it's kind of just a finesse. You know, I use a short handled wrench and just kind of know how tight the NPT fittings need to be, and they typically don't leak. So now we're installing the swivel fitting, getting this -390 in here. This, like I said a second ago, is to try to tighten the clearance out of the turbo so the oil line didn't shoot straight up. So I have a -3 braided stainless steel line. These are kind of important for high temperatures. The line is actually PTFE lined so that it won't corrode or won't dissolve in different solvents and fuels. It is going to be running oil, but there is quite a bit of pretty gnarly stuff in the oil, especially when you're running methanol. So you got to make sure you use good line. One of the worst things that'll happen is your line will rupture and you end up spraying oil everywhere. Just like fuel, oil becomes highly combustible when it's in, you know, gaseous form. So you want to keep that from happening. Now, another thing to keep in mind with steel braided lines is that they essentially can act as a hacksaw, and anything that they're touching as they vibrate, they will rub right through it. And when they're rubbing through it, that can cause severe damage. It could literally rub through this intake manifold over the course of time. Electrical wires, it'll rub right through them. Fuel lines, it'll rub right through them. Really anything that steel braided line touches, it will eventually destroy. So I'm going to go ahead and move this to the top of the manifold. That way I can properly protect it from rubbing on things. So we're going to put it back here, and then I'm going to use one of these handy little grommets to try to separate it off of things so that it can have a little bit of freedom to move as the engine rocks around and vibrates, but it's not going to rub on anything. So just one second here, I'll grab that. So there's the grommet. And you can pick these up at any hardware store. They're, depending on the size, anywhere from 10 cents to $1 a piece. And they really clean things up in the engine bay, so I'm just kind of looking at where I can set that and get that bolted down so that this line will be secure. So we're all tightened down. We're just going to check some clearances, make sure that our charge pipe fits. Actually put that under the coil pack wires. And charge pipe still fits with the oil feed line. Nothing's going to rub or touch. And then the oil feed line fits underneath the coil pack wires. And it's free of the intake manifold. Probably going to move that hose a little bit there just so that everything is free and clear of each other. And because right now we have good pressure. So now what we're going to do is something I said in the last video I might do at some point, and I figured since I'm not really using this duct right now, it'd be a good time to secure it. So I'm just drilling basically 4 holes in the radiator core support, and then I will drill them through the shroud here and then rivet it all together. So we just need to select the correct rivet head for these particular rivets, get that swapped on there, and presto changeo, we'll get these rivets in. Now this might seem basic, but I'm riveting from the bottom because the metal that I'm trying to attach is softer than the core support. So you always want the tail of the rivet to be through the harder metal, as that's what's going to need a little bit more support and structure. So the head of the rivet, which is wider, is over the softer metal, and that's the best way to make it all work together. And there you have it, one ducted ducting duck, or duct, or something like that. Ducted duct for ducting air to the duct, the turbo duct. We'll fix it with duct tape later. So now that the oil feed is installed, we have to put in the return. So we're going to drill a hole in the pan and run a line basically up between this motor mount and the header, try to keep it protected from the heat and far enough away from the motor mount that it's not going to get torn. But we also, that's still the best way to go, otherwise we were looking at some really tight clearances, so that's what we're going to do. So now we have the oil pan off the car so we can figure out where we're going to cut it. And I marked a spot that looked like the ideal spot when we were up on the car, so I'm going to use one of these nifty little roto broach drills and drill a hole in the side. The really cool thing about this is all the chips come to the outside, so I just punched a hole in it. And literally all the chips, as you can see, fly to the outside of the pan, and we're not going to fill. I had the drill on the wrong setting, sorry, it was on hammer. Gotta put that over to drill. Be nice if I knew how to use my fancy tools. There we go. So here we go. So it's just gonna blast a hole right through this guy. Now if you look inside the pan, there is literally no chips at all. A couple from the pilot, but not what you would expect from drilling a 1-inch hole in a pan. Now I apologize for not getting this sequence on film, but I had to go do some other projects. So I had our fabricator weld a stainless steel 3/8 NPT bung to this pan. That way we can use again, NPTs, which aren't ideal, but it does make for finding fittings easier. 3/8 NPT to -10 oil feed line. We want to use a -10. Essentially that's going to be like a 5/8 line, just a hair smaller, and that's going to be adequate oil return from the turbo to make sure that we don't have any buildup. When you're dumping all the way straight into a pan, you want to have as essentially large of an oil return as possible. When you're going into a head or to a port that's designed for oil return, you can run a little bit smaller line, but definitely into the pan when you're returning below the oil level in the pan especially, you want to make sure you have a plenty large port. And here I go apologizing again for not catching everything on video, but I've just got a pretty tight time frame for filming. So here's this -10 fitting that comes out of the pan, goes up through the motor mount near the header. I actually went ahead and put a heat sleeve over this, so there's a DEI thermal sleeve over the actual line to help protect it from heat. Even though it's hard to see in this video, but it's actually got a good inch of clearance between the header. So we got some of this heat sleeve, and this sleeve is going to protect that line, keep it from having any issues down the road. So now it's time to just get things buttoned up for this project. That way we can get on the road with it. Had a little issue with the radiator before, not fitting. Basically it rested on the header with these new equal length, or actually these are unequal length headers, but these are the Tomioka Racing ones. So I found out I could move the radiator up above the radiator core support, thus giving myself the clearance that I need. So I needed to clearance the radiator core center support a little bit, so I've got the hammer here, and we're just kind of massaging gently, as I like to put it, the center support to give us the room that we need to mount the radiator inside it. I'm not sure how this ended up fitting so well, but as you can see, it fits really, really well in those holes that I drilled. And with a small modification to the bottom pipe, everything just kind of came together. I hate it when things work out that well, but that's what happened. Guess what? My radiator fits. I'm as surprised as you are. I'm fired up. Idle motor? Yeah. Because weren't you having issues with that before? Yeah, but I fixed it. Plugged in. Maybe you're just not used to all the air.
So what ended up being the issue here was when we switched the manifold to the backwards, or I guess forward, normal way that it's supposed to go, the throttle body on this is actually a WRX throttle body, so it's actually upside down on this manifold, and in the process, when I bolted the manifold down, the idle air control motor was essentially crushed by where the engine block and the transmission bolt together. There's kind of a bulge, and it broke the idle air control motor, which kind of sucks because that 2-liter idle air control motor is about $200 and something. So killed one of those, but you know, you learn something when you do something like that. So I replaced that, and now it's ready to go on the dyno. So now it's time to get going on the dyno here. So we start out with some small, quick little blips. You don't want to just do a full rip when you have no idea how things are going to go. Now the car has already been tuned, not on boost, but off boost. So the essential tables for how the engine is going to take fuel and everything should hold pretty true, clear up into positive pressure. And sure enough, they did. I actually had to remove a little bit of fuel. It was compensating a little bit too much with adding fuel up in the boost, which is what you really, I mean, that's ideally if you run more boost than you're anticipating, which in this case with any boost, to have it run richer is always the safer thing. But basically trim it out a little bit and get this dialed in. I'll let you guys just kind of listen to the noises that this car makes on the dyno. It's pretty nifty, that little motor that a lot of people don't actually tune. Turns out to sound just like a big mad Subaru in the end. No, there was a little bit of tailpipe smoke after the first pull, I was a little worried that maybe the crankcase ventilation on this car wasn't going to keep up, but it seemed to clear up after the second or third pull, so I think it was just some residual oil in the pipes and whatnot from the assembly and the car that it came off of. So it all actually turned out pretty clean. You'll see in the later video when I'm driving it that there's really no smoke out of the tailpipe, which is something that I was a little bit worried about, just with switching this to a turbo build and making sure that I have adequate oil pressure to the turbo, but not too much, which will push oil past the seals. So everything seemed to work out great, which is, again, things in this project have gone a little bit too well. I'm just waiting for what's actually going to go wrong. But yeah, it's been pretty awesome.
Yep.
Making 250 or whatever.
It's nothing spectacular, but if my keyboard decides it wants to work. It's been a rough day on the dyno. And it went blank. So our max power is 180.1, and that's at, let's pull some boost up here. Maybe. The dyno's really mad at me today. So it crept to 6 pounds by red line. So you can see the turbo, begins spooling. We're actually in positive pressure the whole way, but we've got 2 pounds at 4,000. We're up here about 5 pounds by 4,500, and then just kind of creeps. It's got a 5-pound spring in the wastegate, so it's only creeping a pound. That's pretty good for such a big turbo. So later on we'll put a boost controller on it and turn up the duty cycle and see where it lands. But 5 pounds picked up about 55 horse, 6 pounds picked up about 55 horse. It's pretty good power per pound for such a small motor without really getting this turbo into its efficiency.
So now I put a 4-port electronic boost control solenoid on the car, and the reason why I put a 4-port on there instead of a 3-port is because with a 3-port you can only effectively double the spring pressure of your wastegate, and since we're running a 5-pound spring, that would be only around 10 pounds. But with a 4-port solenoid you can do 4, 5, 6 times as much, and so that'll get us well over 30 pounds off of a 5-pound spring. So it really allows us the flexibility to grow as the setup grows without having to change the spring in the wastegate or anything else on the boost control setup. So on the Haltech right now, we're not running any kind of fancy closed loop boost control. We're just running an open loop, just a wastegate duty cycle that's a target, and that's all. Later on, I'll probably, once I get the boost all dialed in, switch to a closed loop boost control system. And the closed loop systems use a target, and then they use an integral and some fancy math to figure out how to get the wastegate duty cycle to give you the output boost that you're desiring. And they work really, really good, especially at the track for controlling boost. But for now, I'm just kind of limited on time, and we're only looking for 10 pounds or so. So this open loop system will work just fine. At a later date, we'll definitely do a video that highlights all the tuning features on these Haltech engine management systems, but for now this is just pretty basic. We're just putting boost on a car. Later on, maybe at the track, I'll go through like a data log and how we use the logs and the information to find where we want to make changes to the car and all that kind of stuff. But any ideas of what you viewers want to see as far as tuning goes, there's a lot that we can get into, way more than we would ever be able to do in a 20 or 30 minute video. But some ideas of what you want to see will kind of let me know where to start pushing the video. So after adding about 4 more pounds of boost, we got a pretty good result. Picked up about another 40 horsepower. So we added 4 pounds of boost, picked up 40 more horsepower. The math is still working perfect for 220 to the wheels.
So it's not the prettiest thing in the world, but 220 horsepower to the wheels out of a completely stock 1.8 liter. We're not actually spraying nitrous right now. Might use the nitrous at the track if we need to get it up on the turbo, but the spool's not terrible. I'm at full torque by 5,000 RPMs, revs to 7s, so you know, you think about it, you have at least 2,000 RPMs of full torque. Even if I shift a little bit early, shouldn't fall out. This is at 10 pounds. Show you here. So it actually just barely, touches 10 pounds. And that's kind of what I was going for, was a soft ramp in. I'm not trying to hit the boost super hard. I'm not doing anything that's gonna excessively stretch the motor, because that's how this will end up breaking when it does, is just pulling things apart. So trying to ease the hit, bring the torque in soft, and make some power out the top. Definitely a closed course, so don't try this at home. Feels pretty good though. Makes lots of whooshy turbo noises, which is what you want. It makes whooshy turbo noises.
I know, I heard it.
Yeah.
He's like, I can't believe he put a giant turbo on that thing. I'm like, why not? If you got the ECU, why not?
Yeah. What'd you say, Kevin?
I like your turbo sounds.
Yeah?
Join my club. I like it. It's good. Sounds good.
That's why it pays to have a good ECU, Ray.
Thanks for watching the second episode of Will Tune for Tacos. Next episode,